Reading Deep Dive, originally presented at the 2019 Annual Conference of the Pennsylvania Chapter of the American Planning Association, prepared and presented by John Kramer and David Hunter. Reading was laid out in 1748 by direction of Thomas Penn. It has been the seat of Berks County since 1752. Reading was incorporated as a borough in 1783. Reading soon became and has remained the center of the Pennsylvania Dutch area. It is an old and progressive industrial community. The founding, 1748. The original inhabitants were the Lenni Lenape tribe, also known as the Delaware Nation. Thomas and Richard Penn selected the location due to the mountains, the Schuylkill River, and the existing roads. The city was founded in 1748 and named after Reading, Berkshire, England. The land was initially divided into large estates. The original plan was called the Town of Reading, with 520 lots, 204 outlots, and 2 principal streets. A grid pattern was used, with the main streets being Penn and Callowhill. The city center was a 2-block square, east and west on Penn Street, from 4th Street to 6th Street, called Market Square. The intersection of Penn and Callowhill, also known now as 5th Street, was 200 feet by 270 feet. The original plan for the city included 60 feet wide streets, and 20-foot alleys were added. To create the appearance of a prosperous town centered on a marketplace, buildings were erected in 5 years, 3 buildings near Penn Street and 2 buildings on Penn Street. In 1748, there was 1 house within the town boundaries. By 1751, there were 100 houses, and by 1752, there were 200 houses. Also in 1752, Berks County was established and Reading became the county seat. Reading, the early years. The first settlers were innkeepers, trading posts, tanners, and taverns. In 1762, a courthouse was erected on the square. There was 1 tavern with 40 inhabitants. In 1766, market houses were established in the city square, and this was the center of activity. Transportation outside town was by way of the Schuylkill River, ferries, and stagecoaches. Here is a picture of the original courthouse. Here is a picture of the market houses. There were several annexations to Reading after the original land grant, dating from 1813 to the latest in 1967. During the American Revolution, the area's iron industry production was greater than that of England's. In 1783, there was a change in the form of government, as Reading was chartered as a borough by the PA General Assembly. By 1800, log houses were replaced by stone and brick buildings. First half of the 19th century, 1800 to 1850. In 1813, the population of Reading grew to about 3,500 persons. A new borough charter was granted with legal boundaries beyond the original plan. The town plan was altered, providing for streets north and south of the original plan. In 1816, the first Penn Street Bridge was constructed of wood. In 1830, the Schuylkill Avenue Bridge was built, and in 1831, the Bingaman Street Bridge was constructed. Here is a picture of the Penn Street Bridge, constructed as an iron bridge in 1884 and spanned a total of 1,128 feet. In 1825, the Schuylkill Canal was completed, which connected Reading to Philadelphia and the Delaware River. The canal was enlarged in 1832 and again in 1846. In 1828, the Union Canal was completed, connecting the Schuylkill River with the Susquehanna River. In 1833, the Philadelphia and Reading Railroad was incorporated. In 1837, rail service was initiated to Pottstown. Rail service was extended in 1839 to Philadelphia and in 1841 to Pottsville. The Reading Railroad. The Philadelphia and Reading Railroad was one of the first railroads in the United States. Along with the Little Schuylkill, a horse-drawn railroad in the Schuylkill River Valley, it formed the earliest components of what became the Reading Company. The P&R was constructed initially to haul anthracite coal from mines in northeastern Pennsylvania. The original Reading Main Line was double track from its very beginning in 1843. The P&R became profitable almost immediately. Energy-dense coal, known as anthracite, had been replacing increasingly scarce wood as fuel in businesses and homes since the 1810s, and P&R delivered coal was one of the first alternatives to the near monopoly held by Lehigh Coal and Navigation Company since the 1820s. Soon, the P&R bought or leased many of the railroads in the Schuylkill River Valley and extended westward and north along the Susquehanna into the southern end of what became known as the coal region. In Philadelphia, the Reading also built Port Richmond, the self-proclaimed largest privately owned railroad tidewater terminal in the world, which furnished the P&R's bottom lines by allowing anthracite coal to be loaded onto ships and barges for export. In 1871, the Reading established a subsidiary called the Philadelphia and Reading Coal and Iron Company, which set about buying anthracite coal mines in the coal region. The heavy investment in coal paid off quickly. By 1871, the Reading was the largest company in the world, with $170 million in market capitalization, which is the equivalent of almost $4 billion today, and may have been the first conglomerate in the world. In 1879, the Reading gained control of the North Pennsylvania Railroad, which provided access to the burgeoning steel industry in the Lehigh Valley. There was a period of local industrial revolution from 1836 to 1847. Reading became a manufacturing center with the introduction of heavy industry and the birth of steam power. Significant residential growth and taller buildings for commercial uses were constructed. In 1846, the original market houses were replaced by new, larger market houses in Penn Square. By 1847, the population rose to 13,000 persons. On March 16, 1847, Reading was incorporated as a city by act of state legislature. Second half of the 19th century, 1851 to 1900. During the second half of the 19th century, the population of Reading doubled in 20 years, from 15,743 persons in 1850 to 33,930 persons in 1870. Many new residents, mainly European immigrants, came to Reading for employment and to escape problems abroad. Market Square was a fashionable residence, and laborers lived near factories on the fringes. The wealthy began to invest in outlying estates. In the 1850s, the railroad expanded westward to Harrisburg and north to Allentown, which connected the city to the entire nation. Railroad shops and mills were constructed, and new industry and laborer housing fostered growth north of the city. The city boundaries were extended in 1858, 1867, and again in 1869. In 1868, Reading prepared a plan for development of the entire city with all streets on a compass point grid system. By 1870, the railroads replaced the canals. As railroad and residential development extended northward, Market Square diminished as the geographical center of the city. In 1871, the city removed dilapidated market houses from the square and replaced them with 4 brick markets, one market in each quarter of the city. From 1870 to 1910, the population nearly tripled from 33,930 persons to 96,000 persons. There was a building boom, but no land area was added. And due to building associations, more people owned homes than anywhere else because they were very affordable. Major department stores were also established, including Pomeroy's and Whitner's. The city charter was amended in 1861, and in 1864, changes were made to the names and numbers of wards. In 1874, the city received a new charter and becomes a city of the third class. Also in 1874 was the start of the horse-drawn trolley service to the north and east, which by 1893 was all electric. The city provided accessibility, had laborers and work. It became affluent to move to the countryside and the suburbs. First part of the 20th century, from 1900 to 1930. From 1900 to 1930, the population continued to increase, from 79,000 persons to 111,000 persons, which was the highest ever. But by 1910, most of the progress was occurring outside of the city due to the lower land prices, fewer development restrictions, and trolley service. The city continued building smaller row houses, creating a feeling of congestion, drabness, and a loss of individuality. Major happenings included the beginning of the general use of the automobile. Reading had some of the earliest manufacturing of automobiles. The result of growth included noise pollution, congestion, and unattractive open space. So, in 1910, the Civic Association of Reading engages John Nolan to prepare a new city plan. Here's a picture of Penn Square in the early 20th century. As the caption states, it's considered a bare, unfurnished, unattractive open space, blazing hot in summer, bleak and cold in winter. Nolan considered several main factors that would influence the new plan for the city, which included the monotonous grid street plan, the narrow streets and very narrow alleys. Most buildings didn't have setbacks. Different land uses were intertwined. There was no homogeneity of neighborhoods, and there was no zone system like in Germany. Here is an image of the Nolan Plan. The Nolan Plan identified several main things to do, which included adopt a more up-to-date method of locating and improving streets, remove all wires, poles, and obstructions from main streets, take vigorous steps to abate smoke nuisance, and extend the city limits by annexation. There were economic factors likely to control the future development of Reading. These factors included things such as Reading becoming an industrial city with proximity to coal and unsurpassed transportation, and Reading depended upon no one industry. It had furnaces, steel mills, machine shops, wagon works, steel frames for autos, hat factories, hosiery and other mills, breweries, tanneries, railroad shops, and the list goes on. Several other considerations to improve the city of Reading included construction of a central mall or narrow park strip on Penn Square, making the best possible grouping of public and semi-public buildings, laying out a system of thoroughfares and boulevards, including diagonal avenues and a belt boulevard, and gradually eliminating at-grade crossings. Additional considerations included building a better type of bridge across the Schuylkill River, securing as many open spaces as possible for playgrounds, making better use of natural features for public parks, and investigating improvements for housing conditions, such as larger semi-detached homes on curving streets. Here is a picture of the intersection of 5th and Penn Streets in Reading as proposed for development. Here's a picture of Penn Square, where the marching and formation was perfect of the boys' high school class of 1924. In 1912, a new Penn Street Bridge was constructed of stone, and in 1921, a new Bingaman Street Bridge was constructed. Portions of adjoining townships were annexed in 1910, 1912, 1914, 1915, 1917, 1934, and 1935. By 1930, Reading had 700 manufacturing institutions producing over 300 different kinds of goods. Here is a picture of Penn Street in 1941. The Depression, war years, and beginning decline. The economic depression in the 1930s had a severe impact on Reading. Heavy industries suffered the most severe losses, and the Reading Railroad began to decline. But jobs in the railroad industry were less affected than many other industries. Some other impacts of the Great Depression included the physical conditions in the city deteriorated, the birth rate dropped substantially. Very few people moved to the city from rural areas. European immigrants continued to move in, but there were few jobs, and people with means, like an auto or money, began moving to the suburbs. By 1940, an exodus to the suburbs was in progress. World War II restored some economic stability, and Reading was an important industrial center. Post-World War II, the suburban exodus continued due to federal housing policies, highway construction, an increase in private vehicle ownership, the decline of railroads, a deteriorating downtown area, and the increased self-sufficiency of suburban living. In the late 1940s, the city began to see an increase in the number of Hispanic residents. Primarily from Puerto Rico, these immigrants became farm workers. Recent past, 1960 to 2019. Urban renewal. For years, downtown development was at a standstill. With the exception of a few buildings, including Pomeroy's department store, Harold's Furniture, and the Astor Theater, the 600 and 700 blocks of Penn Street was a two-block corridor consisting of empty lots, most of which were used as surface parking lots. The majority of the buildings that stood on these lots had been demolished in the late 1960s to make way for a downtown mall which never materialized. For more history on Penn Square in downtown Reading, please visit burksnostalgia.com. Downtown Reading, Penn Square. If you hear someone refer to Penn Square, they are speaking of the 400 and 500 blocks of Penn Street, with the center being 5th Street. It marks the center of downtown Reading. The center of Penn Square was a traffic circle, and traffic gave way to the trolleys that ran north and south on 5th Street and east and west on Penn Street, before being replaced with a traffic circle. Here is an image of the traffic movements at Penn Square. Here is a historic image of Penn Square. Here is an image of the Penn Square Circle, circa 1960. Proposals for Penn Square. The Penn Square Pedestrian Mall was originally a component of a much larger urban renewal plan. Sasaki Associates' Downtown East Urban Renewal Plan of 1971 proposed an enclosed shopping mall in downtown Reading to compete with shopping malls being built in the suburbs. Penn Mall, which was to span the 600 to 800 blocks of Penn Street, was to encompass a monolithic, cross-shaped, 9-story building straddling 7th and Penn Streets that included both a parking garage and a train station. A large pedestrian space in Penn Square was planned as a landscaped entrance to the enclosed downtown mall. After several delays, when it became apparent that the economics of the downtown shopping mall could not work, the project developer withdrew the proposal. Here is an image of the proposed Penn Square Plaza. Here is an image of the Penn Plaza Pedestrian Mall from approximately 1975 to 1993. Here is an image of the Penn Square Pedestrian Mall, circa the 1970s. Here is an image of Penn Square, circa 1977. Here is an image of Penn Square Plaza, circa 1980. Reading followed a national trend as several cities throughout the country were closing their main streets to automobile traffic in order to create shady pedestrian areas, an ambitious and hopeful effort to attract people back to the city centers who had fled to the suburbs following World War II. While this trend was met with mixed results in other cities, Reading considered its pedestrian mall to be a failure. Here is an image of the deconstruction of Penn Plaza in 1993. Retail in Reading. From 1950 to 1960, Reading remained a major retail center in Berks County with major department stores and specialty stores, movie theaters, restaurants, and was considered generally a place to be. But the suburbs began to build strip shopping centers and then enclosed malls, and city residents continued to move out. Berkshire Mall opened in 1970 and is now anchored only by Boscov's. Fairgrounds Square Mall opened in 1980 and was demolished in late 2021. Now only a Boscov's remains on the site. Located on the northeast corner of Penn and 6th Streets, Penn Square Center was the first of several new office buildings to be built in Center City, Reading between 1977 and 1987. Santander Arena, a 7,160-seat multi-purpose arena built in 2001. The arena sits on the former site of the Astor Theater, one of several grand movie and theater palaces built in the early 20th century. Closed in 1975, the theater sat vacant for over 2 decades. In 1998, the Astor was demolished to make room for the Santander Arena. Steps were taken to retain mementos of the Astor, including its ornate Art Deco chandelier and gates. These are on display and in use inside the arena, allowing insight into the ambiance of the former movie house. The DoubleTree Hotel was built across the street from the Santander Arena in 2015. The former Franklin Street train station was rehabilitated and now houses the Saucony Creek Brewery since 2019. Here is a picture of the inside of the Saucony Creek Brewery. Here is a picture of a more present-day Penn Square. Penn Square has been through many iterations of development since Reading's establishment in 1748. As planners, what type of development should occur in Penn Plaza to reinvigorate the city center and establish the city as a destination location?